Hello, my name is Nigel and this is Who's My Councillor? We're here as part of a series of interviews aiming to allow a glimpse behind the people and the role of Sheffield's City Councillor. Today, we're joined by Councillor Julie Grocutt, who is Deputy Leader of the Council, Executive Member for Community Engagement and Governance, and standing in currently as planning as well, if I remember rightly, and the Councillor for Stocksbridge and Upper Don Ward. I also know that Julie happens to be on the Stocksbridge Town Council, so she has a very full life as a politician. Hello, Julie, welcome.
Thank you, Nigel. Hello, good to see you.
And what I'd like to do is really take you back to the start of your journey in politics and ask you what actually got you involved in politics in the first place, and as a second part to that, why the Labour Party?
Okay, in a previous life, I was a police officer, and for the last 10 years of my service as a police officer, I worked on the Central Committee of the Police Federation. Part of the role that I did there was negotiating paying conditions of service for police officers across England and Wales, and also looking at policing legislation, those sorts of things. As a result of that, I spent quite a lot of time in Parliament, working with MPs and peers, lobbying them about policing issues, making sure that we got the best deal that we could, that sort of thing. So I actually spent quite a lot of time around politics and around politicians. Up until that point, it wasn't something that had particularly interested me, but I did become quite fascinated by the whole thing. So when I retired from the police service, and I must say, having had fallouts in my role in the Police Federation with politicians of all political persuasions,
I can imagine.
Absolutely, I decided that perhaps it might be something I would like to look into. I decided to join the local Labour Party because I have quite strong feelings about social justice, those sorts of things. So I suppose I just naturally gravitated towards the local Labour Party. Having joined the party in Stocksbridge, I became aware that actually we could go and sit on the Town Council. Town councillors are all volunteers, but they are elected by local people. And I put myself up for election and found myself on the Town Council. We have some fabulous town councillors. They're all people who are very well known in the local community and are somewhere that local people will come to with issues and complaints. And what became clear to me as I became more involved with dealing with local people's issues and problems was one that I quite enjoyed it, probably because it was problem solving, and as a police officer that's where my natural skill set was, but actually it was equally frustrating because as a town councillor I only had limited powers, so the next natural progression was
I was going to say, how did that transfer into standing for City Council?
I think probably more out of wanting to do a little bit more for the community than I was allowed to because of the powers and responsibilities we had as a town councillor. So the next thing I knew, I was standing for the City Council, and here I am representing the ward on the City Council. I think and I hope that my town council colleagues find it really helpful and useful because I'm able to share information with them and they are able to pass things to me to resolve. So we have quite a really good working relationship. It certainly seems to work for us as a town, as a local community. Of course, the interesting part of that is, well, Stocksbridge and Deepcar are covered by the Town Council, and that's only part of my ward now as a City Councillor. And I also have Uterbridge and Warncliffe side as well, which sit within Bradfield Parish. So I do from time to time turn up at parish council meetings there as well to make sure that we keep everything within the ward organised and running as well as we possibly can.
Just thinking a little bit more on the role of between town councillor and city councillor. As a town councillor, would you like to see the councillors that represent that area on the town council have more power, more decision making, more fiscal responsibility? Or do you think the balance between that and city council is reasonable at the moment?
I think it's reasonable at the moment, and I say that because the town councillors are all volunteers. It is a purely, although you are elected, it is a purely voluntary role, and I think it's important to remember that town councillors are volunteers. So in terms of giving them more responsibility, I would have concerns that less people may be attracted to take on the role, because it is seen very much as a very local role in terms of raising issues that local people want to see resolved. So I think at the moment we've probably got the balance right. Of course, we've got the new local area committees that have just started up, and indeed we had a town council meeting last Thursday, and one of the things that we discussed was how we see the role between the town council and the local area committee working, and I think that's something that we do need to look into and resolve to make sure that we are providing the best service we can for the people of the area.
Yeah, because there is a little bit of disparity at the moment between those areas that have town or parish councils within the city boundary and those that don't. On the one hand, there are some legal expectations of town and parish councils. They have things that they are responsible for, and they have a certain amount of power and a certain amount of spending attached to that. Whereas the rest of the city will be relying on the local area committees and whatever devolved decision making that creates in due course. I don't want to go into that in too much detail because we would be here all afternoon. So it is a slightly, well, not quite a two-tier system, but a divided system at the moment within the city. Would you see that as something that needs to be addressed further down the line?
Having lived in an area with a town council and having worked on a town council, I think they are really good for local communities. They bring out the best in everybody. They work at a real community level, which I think is important. I think the local area committees will have in some areas, you know, we'll take on that role as well. So I think getting the relationship between the town council and the local area committees right is going to be really important. For instance, in Stocksbridge, because we receive the community infrastructure levy funding, which is part of the funding that we have as a town council, and we operate a participatory budgeting scheme to spend those funds. So we involve the local community in making the decision about how those funds are spent. Of course, the local area committee may be relying and need to work with the town council to access some of that funding. So I think there's lots of things that we need to unpack to see how it will all work together, which obviously is in the very early stages at this moment. And I think we're fortunate that the 4 wards that are in the north area all have a town or parish council.
Yeah.
So hopefully that will be something that we will be able to get some clear guidance on as to how we work forward in the future.
Yes, a little bit of extra bang for your buck, so to speak.
Yes.
Okay, so moving on a little bit in terms of your own background and how your political career has evolved. You find yourself in the role of deputy leader. How did that come about? Was it something you'd always craved to be on the top table, or was it just a force of circumstance?
Absolutely not. I literally did join the city council wanting to do more for my my ward and my town where I live, Stocksbridge and Upper Don. I think this year, though, we found ourselves in very unusual circumstances in that there was no overall control of the city council. And of course, having spent a lot of my time in the Police Federation negotiating pay and conditions of service, when we were looking at how we would have to negotiate how the council was going to run, I just thought, oh, I'd quite like to be involved in that. That's what I used to really enjoy doing. And of course, the way to do that was to put myself forward to be the deputy leader of the council. So you know, had we not found ourselves in the position of having no overall control, I can say quite clearly I would not be the deputy leader of the council right now.
It is an interesting change, obviously. Sheffield City Council has been through no overall control before, and then a period of Liberal Democrat rule. But it is, or has been up to now, a fairly dyed-in-the-wool Labour administration, going right back to 1926, if my history serves correctly, when it was the first big municipal council to be run by the Labour Party. So it's an interesting evolution rather of what's happening within the city, and I can't help but think there is something around the change of demographics within the city and the move to a more knowledge-based economy, rather than so much reliance on manufacturing, that is changing the way Sheffield votes. Would you agree with that, or do you think there are other influences at work as well?
I think there's I think that's part of it. I think we've seen, you know, politics across the piece, across the country, people changing how they vote. We I don't know, we almost have this populism type of voting going on, and certainly it's really interesting. I've just come from this morning from a conference where I've been listening to young people in Sheffield speaking about what they would like to see for their city, you know, what leadership means to them, and how they would like to see the city progress over the next 10 years. And it's really interesting listening to them because, you know, when they were speaking about good leaders, they were talking about people who listen, who can make decisions, who are not in it for them, but are in it for the greater good. And of course, all the things that they would like to see. You know, young people are very in tune with what society needs now in terms of, you know, the environment, public transport, you know, youth services and provision, education, manufacturing. They were talking about all these things. It was quite inspiring, actually. And I think, you know, not just young people, but everyone is now looking at what are local politicians, what are they delivering for me, what impact will that have on me, and are voting accordingly. And perhaps that's no bad thing.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting that, you know, when you and I are long gone, the people you've been talking to today will be the ones having these conversations that we're having at the moment. And I think it's been quite enlightening for me being involved with some of the activists that are thriving in the city at the moment, to recognise that there is still that fire in the belly that this city had in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when, you know, activism was rife and trade unions were new and all that sort of stuff. So I think there is, you know, if we get past the 1.5 degrees of global warming, there is hope for the future, I think, in our young people. So, and, you know, I sit here as a pale male and stale active citizen saying as much. Okay, so that's an interesting step that you took to recognise that part of the changing of not just the no overall control situation within the council, but also the transition that's going through at the moment to create a committee style of governance, which you are leading, obviously, as executive member for governance, amongst so many other things. That's an interesting change that's taking place. Just to unpack what that means a little bit on the more local level for you as a both as a ward councillor and as a town councillor for Stocksbridge, what are your priorities for Stocksbridge and Upper Don ward at the moment? What do you see going forward?
Well, a number of years ago, as the town council, we applied to the government for some funding from the Future High Streets Fund. Unfortunately, we weren't successful because clearly Stocksbridge, you know, has a very proud history within the steel industry. We all know the issues and concerns that have faced the steel industry for a number of years now, but are becoming quite critical at this moment in time. And it was quite important for us that we tried to look at how we could reinvigorate the town centre, how we could make sure that, you know, our young people who were growing and learning in the town would stay in the town, because we discovered that we have an above average elderly population in the town. There was no reason for young people to stay here. That was unfortunate, but of course we had some preliminary plans that had been done. So when the government's Towns deal came about, we were very fortunate that we have been successful in getting some funding from that, and we've been awarded £24.1 million. Now, for me, we need to regenerate the high street. It needs to be not just about shops and services, but it needs to be about small businesses, so that local people can open their own businesses, so that we can create more and in particular skills jobs for people. You know, Fox Valley opened in 2014, 2015. That's been a great boost to the local economy. It's lots of service industry jobs. I think we need to widen that scope. For me, Stocksbridge is a fantastic part of the city. It sits right on the edge of the Peak District. Indeed, some of the Peak District is within our ward boundary. And so for me, we need to look more at how we can grow our economy by becoming a tourist destination. You know, One Cliffside has the home for rock climbing. We came second in the national towns best walks a couple of years ago. We have beautiful scenery. You know, if there is a sport you want to play, from football, cricket, golf, bowling, rugby, tennis, we have a sports club in the town that does that. We have a fantastic community run leisure centre. So for me, it's about bringing those all together and making Stocksbridge a centre for tourism. I think it's a great opportunity, a fantastic way to grow the town, to grow business, to make sure that our town thrives and can do well in the future. So my hope is that with the regeneration from the government funding that we've secured, we will be able to start seriously investing in the town and make all of that happen. And I would say to anyone who's watching this who hasn't been, come along to Stocksbridge. It's a lovely town. Enjoy the shopping, enjoy the scenery that we've got in the area. It is beautiful.
And of course, sorry. And of course, the saving of the leisure centre was one of the things that sort of put Stocksbridge on the map as far as the city was concerned, because prior to that, it's often been thought of, well, it's this place that's virtually in Barnsley. You know, it's a little bit of an outlier as far as the city is concerned. But the furore over the potential closing of the leisure centre because of budget cuts and the fight to actually keep it going made Stocksbridge almost a bit of a hero in the city, in that sense that it showed that local areas can do if they're given the opportunity. And of course, one of the benefits in Stocksbridge was the town council. And I think it's interesting that there are now all sorts of comments being made and plans being put forward to connect Stocksbridge more solidly to the city itself. The Upper Don Valley Trail, which is being not pioneered, but championed by places like Wardsend Cemetery, and that would be on that route into the city centre, I think is a fascinating way to look at how to create a sustainable link to Stocksbridge. And, you know, potentially, if ever the government finally invests in public transport a little bit more, and particularly rail travel, an improved rail link would not go amiss, I suspect. So there's a lot of things there.
There is. We actually have a bid into the government through the Restoring Our Railways to get the Don Valley line back open to Stocksbridge. We should hear about that later on this month, so we have everything crossed at the moment that we will get that, because, you know, clearly public transport, it is an outlying town. It does rely heavily on public transport. Active travel would be great. You know, if we could get all of there's just little sections we need to get open on the Don Valley Trail. It would be great to see people being able to cycle all the way along there, and indeed for people from the rest of Sheffield to be able to cycle on it. You know, we had the Tour de Yorkshire finished in Stocksbridge a couple of years ago. We have the National Hill Cycle Championships up Peroid Hill, which is a hill that I struggle to walk up. It is amazing to watch people cycle up it, to be honest. So you know, there's lots of really exciting things going on in the town, and connectivity to, you know, the city centre and the wider Sheffield area, I think is vitally important, definitely.
Yeah, and if we can, you know, if you base that around public transport and active travel, benefit for the climate emergency as well, it all sort of starts to fit together quite neatly, doesn't it?
It's a no-brainer, really, yeah.
You'd hope so, but, you know, we have a certain government in that we have to tackle first. And I guess finally, just to round off the priorities side of things, as deputy leader, you have a citywide role as well, and being on the executive. On a personal level, however, what are your priorities for Sheffield City?
I think there are a number of priorities. I think dealing with the climate emergency is one of them. You know, that's not only about dealing with active travel, making sure that we have clean air, that's making sure that our homes are properly insulated so that people can live in, you know, warm, safe, sustainable homes. I think looking after that is really important. Looking at how we make sure that the city centre grows, recovers properly from COVID, so that, you know, businesses, leisure, entertainment, it becomes a great city once again that people want to come into when everyone feels that it's safe to do so. But I think equally important are our district centres, and at this moment we are investing through the Economic Recovery Fund in our district centres, because again, coming back to the bigger climate picture, if people have local district centres that they can travel to, that offer the services and facilities that people need locally, again, that's another great step forward in terms of you know, dealing with the climate emergency. I think one of the great things that we have in our city are our parks. We are very fortunate, we have so many parks, so it's making sure that we continue to make sure that they're accessible for people. And I hate the term, but off the top of my head I can't think of another one. The levelling up agenda, in terms of making sure that our more deprived areas get the support and the infrastructure that they need, so that everyone in the city can do the best that they can live in a safe, healthy, happy environment. I think it's really important. And I suppose really, going back to earlier in the conversation, you know, making sure that we deal with the services that we need to for our young people, be that, you know, education, youth services, all those sorts of things, to make sure that they can become happy, responsible and proud citizens.
Completely.
So quite a bit to do.
Yeah, there's a heck of a lot to do. And that's before we go on to things like sorting out planning, sorting out adult social care, which are all massive projects that aren't solely a city issue in many cases, because they're impacted by national policy to a greater or lesser extent. And so much of the money is now being channeled not direct to decision makers locally like yourself, but are being channeled via the mayoral authority, which is, you know, I have issues with the way that works, none of which I keep from Dan Jarvis. He knows very well what these issues are. So I think there's a lot about the way that the levels of hierarchy within decision making and local governance need to be addressed, I think, but it's a long job.
I think sometimes you think that it's deliberately complex when it could actually, you know, be a lot more straightforward, simpler. I think there's something there about national government trusting local councils. They should do more of that. You know, that would make everyone's job easier. I believe. You know, the budget is a massive issue, as you said, Nigel, in terms of then being able to, you know, deal with the pressures that we have, you know, with the likes of adult social care. It will be interesting to see how the recent decisions made by the government will impact and play out. I sincerely hope that councils will benefit from that, so that we can provide the social care that's so desperately needed in the city. But
yeah,
again,
and I think that, yeah, and I think that a whole idea of trying to create some sort of levelling up approach without allowing decision makers at local council level to have a bit of fat in the budget is ridiculous. You know, business these days is starting to recognise that the whole idea of lean management doesn't allow for the sort of shocks and impacts that we've had 2008 in the financial crisis, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago with the impact of the pandemic. Businesses are now starting to realise they need some fat in their budgets to tackle those sort of unexpected emergencies. And unfortunately, I'm not convinced that government has quite got that yet. And unfortunately, I'm not convinced that the opposition party has quite got that yet. I think there's a lot of work to do on that side of things.
I think there is a lot of work to do, and I think it's really important that central government, instead of dictating to local councils, start to listen to them. You know, this is a lesson that we have learnt in Sheffield. We're listening to our communities. We're engaging more with our communities. You know, and that's hopefully will work well for the future in terms of how the city runs and flourishes. And I think it's really important that that's what the government do with local councils as well, because the nonsense we have in terms of how we are funded is just not sustainable in any way, shape or form. And that isn't good for anyone.
No, no, indeed. Julie, a good point. And I think at that point also a good place to stop. It's been very interesting talking to you, some very interesting insights on the relationships of councils within the city, as well as some glimpses into your personal drivers as far as and priorities as far as both your ward and your city are concerned. So I think all I'd like to say at this point is, Julie, thank you so much for this chance to hear about the person behind the role of the councillor. And I hope you've enjoyed the experience. Nothing too traumatic?
Yes, no, not at all. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been nice catching up with you, Nigel.
Great, and I hope you'll recommend this to your colleagues, because we would like to spread the good word around as many councillors as we can get involved in this, to find out why they became councillors and how they hope the city will move forward. So thank you again. As for the rest of you, thank you very much for joining us. And if you want to know more about Who is My Councillor, you'll find us on our website, which is straightforwardly whoismycouncillor.co.uk, all one word, obviously. And I'll see you the next time. Thank you and goodbye.